Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Charles Freedman radio program, News Talk from 9 to noon here on SantaCruzVoice.com. That's right. We're all set for another program, ready to talk about various topics and ready to take your calls on whatever topic you'd care to raise. 831-265-5050. 831-265-5050 is the number to call. Give us a buzz. We'll talk it over. I always like to open the program, if I can, with something that will tickle your funny bone. Today, the Hearst Press has supplied something, well, I don't know. I think it's funny, but then again, you know me. On the back page of the news section, they have their editorial sheet. And today, instead of the usual leftist screed on top of a group of letters to the editor from local leftists, we have something else entirely. We have an entire page dedicated with a big, full-color picture dedicated to Joan Baez. That's right, she's still alive. One of those harpies from the 60s. My God, how many of them were there? Both male and female. Twanking tuneless nonsense on guitars while making noises with their voices that made them sound as if they were either suffering from appendicitis or had a tremendous pain somewhere. Somebody's on my foot. Well, so what's the headline? New Joan Baez poems target Trump. So Joan Baez has written some poems that are... no, of course I won't. No. My sense of humor doesn't extend that far. But you say you want to hear one? Okay, let me see here. The shortest one. Senators, congresspeople, journalists, lawmakers, bystanders, liberals, and spineless Democrats, pony up! When did starting a sentence with, "I don't see why," ever elicit a satisfactory answer or bring an opponent to heel? Bring an opponent to heel. Pony up! Instead of saying, "I don't see why," it's, "I demand to know why." Then override their double talk and distractions and evasions, insist you need a real answer until you get one or as close to one as some spokespeople can eke out. Don't settle for alphabet soup. Get an answer. If you can't push back on anything you can, the Trumpists lie all day long and they are winning the game. This is a poem. It reads more to me like a paragraph of text, prose. But when Joan Baez writes it, it becomes a poem. Now, isn't that funny? So what we get here, bottom line, another hysterical leftist screaming in the dark because most people don't want an open border. Because most people don't think it's fair to have men competing in women's sports. Because most people want an economic system that provides a level playing field. You know, really basic stuff. Most people want clean, safe streets. Most people want schools that teach their kids instead of indoctrinating them. All of this drives Ms. Baez and her like-minded ilk out of their cotton-picking minds. And so we get this kind of primal scream. And frankly, for me, the proper reaction is, that's ridiculous. Because it is. Okay, let us move on. 831-265-5050 is the telephone number, 831-265-5050. The same newspaper section on the front page, above the fold, Harris won't run for governor in 2026. Well, I was initially disappointed. I thought Phil Harris would have made a great governor, but then I found out that this wasn't about Phil Harris. As a matter of fact, I wasn't really surprised. Phil Harris is a great comedian, singer, etc., but he's never been politically minded that I know of, so I really wasn't thinking that Phil was going to run for governor. On the other hand, there's this Kamala woman who's walked into a number of offices here in California where really there was no credible opposition. And as soon as she ran into credible opposition, i.e. when she tried to run for president in 2020, she succeeded in raising a bunch of dough right off the bat. After all, she was a U.S. Senator from California at the time. She can shake the trees, get something to fall out, and she did. So she raised enough money to be a credible candidate for president, and then she actually had somewhat of a boomlet in the polls. Oh, hey, Senator from California, colored, female, all these things. And, to the identity-minded people in the Democratic Party, this checked a lot of boxes. And so she had a momentary surge in popularity and approval. And then came the first debates among Democrats. This is when they still had, 12 or 14 candidates running. And a couple of them, most notably a young congresswoman from Hawaii named Tulsi Gabbard, just really laced into her. And there it went. As quickly as Kamala Harris had raised her money and gotten her bump, the bump went away. People who had been attracted to her for various reasons actually got a good look at her and said, no, I don't think so. We can do better than this. And they turned away. I can tell you that in a presidential race of that nature, to have your numbers go up and then go down, it's death. It's not like, well, you can recover. No, you can't. You had your shot. When you start to move up, you either keep moving up or else it's Sydney or the bush. So Kamala Harris found herself out of the running for president, but that was okay. She was still a senator from California, still had a paycheck, no problem. But then, in one of the most incomprehensible decisions I've seen, Joe Biden picked her as his running mate. You would have thought in that crowd of Democrats, if you wanted somebody who'd also run for president and benefited from that exposure, pick somebody who actually showed up well. Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, somebody like that who, maybe didn't get the nomination, but at least people looked at him and said, that's a credible performance. That's pretty good. Last night I was looking at a commentary on YouTube, and the person that I was listening to, a well-placed political reporter, said that Jim Clyburn was the one who had put Kamala Harris on the ticket. And, let me put it this way. I don't know that that's true. But I look at it and it makes sense. After all, we know that Mr. Clyburn was the one who engineered Joe Biden's nomination. Prior to his endorsement, his resurrection of Joe Biden, he was going nowhere fast, just as he had the other times he'd run for president. One more flopperoo. But Jim Clyburn stepped in, and as a matter of fact, from that point forward, Mr. Clyburn's voice has been very strong. I mean, you do something like that, you put somebody in the White House, when they call you on the phone, you pick up, right? Right. So the story there was that Clyburn was the one who said he wanted Kamala Harris to be the vice presidential nominee. Well, Clyburn is from South Carolina and served in the House of Representatives. Harris is from California, served in the U.S. Senate. Maybe they just didn't see each other that much. No reason why they should. Didn't move in the same circles at all. And possibly Clyburn, like many Democratic primary voters at the outset, was simply looking at a set of boxes checked, a resume that really, again, didn't reflect the kind of adversity and overcoming of adversity that most resumes reflect. Kamala Harris has been one big participation award after another. At any rate, the story is that he's the one who got her on the Democratic ticket. 4 years later, she's all set to serve another 4 years as vice president, but Joe Biden, by this time, is far more declined. I mean, this is a progressive thing. The man is in his, well, he's almost 80 years old. Now he is over 80 years old. Let's just say that he was losing it, and it became blatantly obvious when he debated former President Trump. And instead of holding a contest for their nomination, the Democrats simply said, okay, well, Harris is our candidate, but they didn't have the president resign and make Harris the president. None of this makes any sense. The Democrats show up through this time after time after time as the game that couldn't shoot straight. So they elevate Kamala Harris to a position far beyond her capabilities. And it shows up. I mean, that laugh of hers channeling Margaret Hamilton every time somebody asks her a question. And speaking of asking questions, what would you do differently? Nothing. Wow. You know, to me, the amazing thing is still, look at that election. Trump got 50%. She got 48%. She should not have run anywhere nearly that strongly. And the fact that she did points to the political weakness of Donald Trump. I know Trump supporters don't like to hear that, but if you can read numbers, 48%. 48% is a bigger chunk of the vote than Mr. Trump got in 2016 or 2020. Only finally in 2024 was he able to move up to 50%. And again, this is a reflection, I think, more than anything else, of the incredible incompetence and weakness of his opponent. People keep voting no on these critters. Well, Trump's back in office now. He's making things happen. To his credit, he's actually pushing the country in a new direction. The proof will be in the pudding. We'll talk more about that later. But the big news today is that Kamala Harris, this political gargoyle, will not be running for governor of California in 2026. Now, if you're a Republican, you might be tempted to say, well, that's good. That's nice. That's something will be spared. But I wouldn't be so cheerful just yet. She's not running for governor, but guess who is? Let me see here. Former Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins. The Lieutenant Governor of the state of California, Elena Kounalakis. The State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, a wholly owned subsidiary of the teachers' unions, incidentally. Former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa. Former State Controller Betty Yee. Former Congresswoman Katie Porter. Former Health and Human Services Secretary and was he a senator? Xavier Becerra? I think he was. I think that, yeah. I know he was a congressman. I believe he had become a senator and then was elevated to the cabinet. And that was how Alex Padilla became a senator? Yeah, I think so. Republicans. Who have we got here? Chad Bianco, sheriff of Riverside County. Fox News host Steve Hilton. In other words, we don't have a candidate for governor. And if you really want to learn just exactly how, there's a local fundraising event coming up. This gives me another chance to plug it because this is the annual Republican Party barbecue, and they hold this generally in Corralitos, someplace like that. They keep the location confidential these days until you sign up because they don't want harpies showing up. But no fewer than 4 Republican candidates for governor will be there. Steve Hilton, whom you just heard mentioned. Leo Zaki, a farmer from Fresno. Daniel Mercuri, a veteran from Orange County, and Che On, a clergyman from Orange County. I don't know who any of these people are. Well, Steve Hilton I've seen, the bald head and the British accent on Fox News. But none of these people is a credible candidate for governor of California. None of these people is generally known. You could say that about some of the Democrats too, but at least in many cases, these are people who have run and won statewide races. Tony Thurmond, Konalakis, Betty Yee, Xavier Becerra, all of them have run statewide and been elected. So people have seen their name on a ballot. Now, if the Republicans can't match that, we don't have anybody who has run statewide and won in quite a while. The biggest name we have is Kevin McCarthy, former Speaker of the House, certainly able to raise money far better than any of these other individuals. But he has made no move whatsoever to run for governor, and it's obvious he is not doing so. My prediction is that in the next race for governor, if this keeps up the way it is, we are going to wind up with a choice in November between two Democrats. Because I don't see, and particularly, there are so many of these Republicans. There are now 5 Republicans. Che On, Daniel Mercuri, Leo Zaki, Steve Hilton, and Chad Bianco. 5 Republicans, none of whom has any cachet. But, if you take the already minority Republican vote, split it 5 ways. Remember, in the California Republican primary system, the top 2 finishers, regardless of party, are the ones who run against each other in November. The only thing we have going for us here is that the Democrats have even more than 5 candidates. They're going to split their vote 6 or 7 ways. Kamala Harris at least didn't give them an 8th. But, the idea that we should be looking to elect the governor of California next year, and we don't even have a credible candidate, and I'm ashamed of that. That may change. Heavens, there's still plenty of time left this year and all of next year. But I don't see anybody yet in this field who is showing the kind of fundraising capability, publicity raising capability. Most people, you know who these people are because you listen to my program. But most people, 99 out of 100 have no idea who these guys are. And building that kind of name recognition in just a few months, well, you can do it, but you're either going to have to get a lot of free media, the way Donald Trump did. When he came down that escalator, he didn't have to pay anybody for that, to telecast that. No, it was new. I don't know. Who could do it? Sheesh. I'll admit right now I'm stumped. Be that as it may, Kamala Harris is not running for governor. That you can take to the bank. And, I don't know. It's hard to see how she could do that much worse a job than the rest of these bozos that the Democrats have running. They all seem to me to be cut pretty much from the same cloth in terms of ideology. In this same news section of the Hearst Press is a piece about how California is going to fight the deregulatory regime being propounded out of Washington. I shared that story with you yesterday. Under Barack Obama, the EPA decided that greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, were pollutants, and that therefore the EPA should undertake vigorous efforts to suppress them. That might cost money. We don't care. That might cost jobs. We don't care. That might cause poorer people to not be able to afford energy and transportation. We don't care. The oceans are going to rise 5 feet by the end of the century. And if we bankrupt our country, somehow we can stop that. Are you beginning to catch on to just exactly how ludicrous this is? These people are deluded. There are places where they would be met by men with, nice white suits, butterfly nets, and they'd be taken away and helped. They'd be given therapy, possibly a stuffed animal. And maybe, hopefully, they'd get better. But no, instead, the Democrats elect them to office. Lord help us. Anyway, that's the 21st century. Where do you take a defective century for refund or return? I want my money back on the 21st century. I'm disappointed overall. Oh, there are nice things about it, but generally speaking, the climate is disappointing. Telephone number is 831-265-5050, 831-265-5050. Before I move on, I started to mention the Republican barbecue, and I forgot to tell you how to sign up. You go to SantaCruzRepublicans.com, SantaCruzRepublicans.com, and make your reservations to meet these nobodies who are running for governor. I mean, they're nice people. You might enjoy shaking hands with them. The one thing I can guarantee you will be an opportunity to share a wonderful afternoon with like-minded people here in your community, which is something that in itself is quite valuable, seeing as how if you're a Republican, a conservative Republican in Santa Cruz County, there are times when you get to feeling kind of lonely, maybe even besieged. So attend the annual Republican Barbecue Fundraiser, August 23rd, noon to 5. And to get your reservation, go to SantaCruzRepublicans.com. And incidentally, there will be other Republican candidates for local offices there, so your chance to interact with, get an answer from, get in the face of people who will actually have their names on the ballots in the primary election coming up in June of next year. Let's take a break. It's 9:30 at Santa Cruz Voice. I'm Charles Freedman. Reach me at 831-265-5050.
The Scotts Valley Chamber of Commerce presents the 25th Annual Scotts Valley Art, Wine, and Beer Festival, August 16th and 17th at Sky Park in Scotts Valley. 2 days of fun for the whole family with food, fine art, a kids' fun zone, and live music, including the Joint Chiefs and the Lost Boys featuring James Durbin. Join us Saturday for the Cops and Rodders Car Show with over 100 vintage cars on display. And don't miss Dog Day Sunday with contests for all canines. All this and free admission to the Scotts Valley Art, Wine, and Beer Festival. See you there.
You need a clean, pleasant space to conduct business, but you don't want the burden of a long, expensive lease. Your solution is Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Satellite offers private offices, meeting and conference rooms, even co-working by the hour, day, week, or month. Schedule a tour at SatelliteCoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
Get hooked up with affordable cannabis at the locally owned Hook Outlet. The Hook is a friendly neighborhood outlet where everybody above the age of 21 can have access to the best cannabis products for the best prices in the county. Get friendly local service and great prices in person and online at the Hook Outlets in Capitola and Watsonville. Order online at hookoutlet.com and pick up 9 to 9, 7 days a week. Get hooked up at the locally owned Hook Outlet.
Hi, folks. How many of you out there love to garden? Wouldn't it be nice to grow some of your own food? Or maybe a flower garden would brighten your day. All you need is the Knox Garden Box, a heavily constructed, portable, elevated garden on legs that can virtually change the way you've gardened in the past. The Knox Garden Box can be set up anywhere. Yes, you can place it right on concrete at knoxgardenbox.com. That's KNOX, gardenbox.com.
At 9:31, welcome once again, Santa Cruz Voice. I'm Charles Freedman. News Talk from 9 to noon. 831-265-5050 is the telephone number. Okay, we began with the ridiculous. I mean, Joan Baez writing poetry about Donald Trump. Now let's move to the sublime. Longtime listeners will have heard me speak of Michael Barone. Michael Barone is a political analyst and historian. Of all the people in that line of work today, I respect him most. Mr. Barone is now reaching late age. I think he's about 80, something like that. Fortunately, still absolutely sharp as a tack. For many years, he was the moving force behind the Almanac of American Politics, which is a digest brought out every 2 years. It runs down the career and particulars of every member of Congress and the district or state that they represent, and the circumstances of their election, etc., etc. It is quite literally a handbook of American politics that is indispensable to people who are in that line of work. Mr. Barone has stepped back from being the prime editor and author of that, but for something like, a quarter of a century, this was part of his work. So when today I went to Real Clear Politics and discovered that the top item on the menu was a writing of Michael Barone, I decided this is a treat. This is going to be a fantastic piece of analysis, and I'm going to share it. I haven't read this yet. I'm sharing it with you today. We're all going to. This is like opening a Christmas package. Okay. Mr. Barone's topic today is heading towards the midterm elections. Democrats are not up off the floor. Just within the last week, I believe, on this program, we've addressed the fact that Democrats' favorability numbers are just terrible, worse they've been in 30 years. But at the same time, the generic vote for Congress that is continually polled looks about 50-50. And again, it's kind of like I was asking a few minutes ago, why is it that Kamala Harris ran so well? Well, this time, Mr. Trump isn't going to be on the ballot, but the Republican Party, is pretty much his brand now. That's one thing he certainly accomplished. It is hard to tell somebody, I'm a Republican, but I'm not a Trumper. It's true of me. I support Mr. Trump. I've voted for him a few times, but I'm certainly not a Trumper. I do not blindly follow him. I question some of his policies and ideas. I believe that his political tactics could be improved. And I'd like to see him do better. So when I make a criticism, it's a constructive criticism. Hey, don't do that, do this. Nevertheless, my voice is not very loud, and to most people, if I say I'm a Republican, they figure, oh, you're a Trump supporter. That's the world we live in today. So maybe that's part of what's going on. Anyway, let's see what Michael Barone has to say about it. Here's a clue that the off-year elections in November of next year may not go the way conventional wisdom suggests. Conventional wisdom is the president's party almost always loses the House and slightly less often Senate seats. There are two structural reasons for this. One, parties in power tend to do things that produce results that some voters dislike. The second reason, the out-party candidates can adapt to local terrain. They focus on issues on which the president's party stands are unpopular, but that depends on the out-party being an acceptable alternative, which leads to the clue referred to above. Politico's Andrew Howard reports that former Democrats Brian Bangs in South Dakota, Trump plus 29 in 2024, and Todd Achilles in Idaho, Trump 36, are joining former Democrat Dan Osborne of Nebraska, Trump plus 20, to run for senator as self-declared independents, with no credible Democrat in the race. This is not the first time this happened. Aha! By golly, here's Barone noting that Osborne did so in 2024, scaring incumbent Republican Congresswoman Senator Deb Fischer while losing by only 6 points. That was an improvement on Greg Orman's 2014 independent candidacy in Kansas, where he lost by 11 points in a state that was plus 22 for president 2 years before. Why are these Democrats losing in states, why are these Democrats, some in states such as South Dakota and Nebraska that have re-elected Democratic senators in recent years, shunning the Democratic label? Most likely because in a country of increased straight-ticket voting, they believe the Democratic label is political poison. Now, after 4 years of the Biden administration, the Pew Research and presidential electorate moved from plus 6 Democratic in 2020 to plus 1 Republican in 2024, with Republicans close to equal among under 30 voters. For months now, Republican pollster Patrick Ruffini notes, we've observed a new trend in polling. The Democratic Party's favorability ratings have fallen below the GOP's. That's hardly ever happened before. Now, that is something new and different. Having watched these numbers for literally decades, I can attest that that statement is true. Republicans have always been at a disadvantage in terms of these numbers. The Wall Street Journal's July 16th to 20th poll, 63% of voters have negative feelings about Democrats, the highest since 1990. That poll also shows Republicans maintaining that. 1990, that's interesting. 1990 was the off-year election. George H.W. Bush was president of the United States. And in the off-year election, 1990, Democrats continued their majorities in both the House and the Senate. So were they that unpopular, but they won the damn election? That's the thing to remember here. That poll showed Republicans maintaining their 2024 lead in party identification, in sharp contrast to Trump's first win, and it showed pluralities of voters favored Republicans, even on issues on which majorities disapproved of Trump's most recent actions, including the economy, tariffs, immigration, foreign policy, and Ukraine. It looks like Democrats' baggage, especially from the Biden years, is heavier than the loads Trump Republicans must juggle. Democrats' credibility has been damaged as their arguments, one after another, have proved to be based on lies. The Russia collusion hoax, COVID-19 school closings, transitory inflation, the Hunter Biden laptop, open borders immigration policies, all of which suggests Democrats' hopes of overturning the Republican Senate majority may rest more on independents running in Trump-heavy states than on purple state Democrats. And despite conventional wisdom, there's a cognizable chance that Republicans will not lose the narrow majority, 220 to 215, that they won in the House of Representatives. Once upon a time, split-ticket voting was de rigueur. Democrats maintained a large House majority in 1972 despite Richard Nixon's 61% win, by winning fully half the seats in House districts that Nixon carried. Those days are gone. In 2024, only 16 House districts split between their presidential choice and their member of Congress. Wow. That is a new environment politically from what I have been historically used to. The Democrats' problem is that Republicans are defending only 3 districts carried by Kamala Harris. Democrats are defending 13 seats won by Donald Trump. So, judging by this particular criteria, there are more targets for us to shoot at than there are for them. That's one of the reasons that Steve Kornacki, to the dismay of his MSNBC audience, says Republicans could hold on to the House. Meanwhile, Harry Enton dismays his CNN audience by pointing out that the narrow leads Democrats enjoy in the House generic vote polling leave them not nearly as well positioned for 2026 as they were at this point in 2005 and 2017. For their big gains, 2006 and 2018, those were big elections for the Democrats. Core Democratic hatred of and obsession with Donald Trump will certainly have them stomping to the off-year polls. And Republicans' new biracial and young male coalition may not be similarly motivated, but Republican gains are widespread, while Democratic gains are scarcely visible. As Bloomberg columnist Connor Sen writes, it's currently not possible to identify any cohort of potential first-time Democratic voters. Trump has gained a percentage over 3 elections, as the New York Times brilliant graphics pointed out, in 1,433 counties with 42 million people, while his Democratic opponents gained 3 times only in 57 counties with 8 million people. For years, the belief was Democrats had the demographic destiny on their side. Jewish Insider's Josh Kraushaar tweeted, "Now the inverse is true." Veteran liberal reporter Thomas Edsel portrays in his New York Times online column a realignment with staying power. The real possibility that discontent with the Democratic Party, its perceived failure to value work, its political correctness, the extremity of its social and cultural leftism might have become deeply embedded in the electorate. Meanwhile, the economic numbers are coming in more positively than those who predicted doom in April from Trump's tariffs. I call them lunatic, and as analyst Nate Silver writes, there is a strong case that voters are concerned about the economy and the cost of living, but that everything else is priced in. As for the fuss over the Epstein tapes, Silver writes, it looks like we're back to the usual pattern. Overwhelming majority of voters either already hate Trump or are happy to shrug off his scandals. The country is moving toward Trump, says Chris Matthews, one-time staffer for Jimmy Carter and Tip O'Neill. They want a president who's a strong figure, and he's got it, and half the country buys it. Nothing's inevitable in politics, but so far, the Democrats have not gotten up off the floor. Analysis, wisdom from Michael Barone. As I share this with you, obviously I'm reading it to you, thinking about it at the same time. We have got a telephone call, our first for the day, so let's go ahead. Always top priority on the program. And boom, there we go. Hello there. Evan, is this you?
Yes, sir, Charles. Thank you for taking my call. I'd like to kind of keep on your topic just a bit. It sounds kind of interesting, but maybe change it up just a bit. I was reading and listening to some of the news out there, and I'm not sure. I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts are on how Texas might be changing up some of their political maps.
I'm uncomfortable with it for the reason that I would like to see maps that are actually drawn with the idea of creating communities of interest. For example, here in California, the idea that the city of Fresno should be split between 2 congressional districts. I don't think it should be. I think all of Fresno should be in one House district. But that's just the way I think. What Evan is referring to here is the practice of gerrymandering, which goes back 250 years or more, which is essentially drawing House districts, Senate districts, or not state Senate districts, not federal, but drawing them in such a way as to advantage or disadvantage one political party. Now, obviously, you can't do that for the U.S. Senate because U.S. senators are elected statewide, so you can't redraw that map. You're elected from Nevada or Arizona or wherever you're elected from. It used to be that way here in California in our state Senate. We had a state Senate of 40 members who were elected from our 58 counties. Some of the smaller counties were banded together, like, Mono, Inyo, and Alpine would be one senator. But Los Angeles County, the most populous county in the United States, had one state senator. San Francisco had one state senator. And Alameda County, Santa Clara County each had one state senator. And so there was no redistricting done. Now, this was ruined by the Supreme Court back in the 60s when they handed down a one-man, one-vote ruling that applied to both houses of state legislatures instead of only one. But I digress. We're talking here about lower houses of the legislature, most notably the federal Congress here, the House of Representatives, the numbers of congressmen are apportioned among the states as to their population, and then in each state, the state is depended upon to draw districts. As it used to be that the legal standard was as near as practicable equal in population. Today, this has been perverted to utterly equal in population. Now, this is a device that enables gerrymandering. Why would I say that? First of all, let's say that this number can never be accurate. You take a census over a period of, 3 months, let's say? It takes you time to count all the noses in, say, the state of Texas. You said Texas. Every day, people are born. Every day, people die. Every day, people move in. Every day, people move out. So you publish a number of a population for a given electoral district, a given precinct. Is that number accurate? Maybe on a particular day at a particular time, but certainly not permanently. But that number, insofar as their districting process is concerned, is graven in stone. That is the population of that particular electoral district. And that's the number that's used. So when you draw up a district, you have to add together the number of precincts it takes to equal the population of a House seat. In Texas, let me see, I think Texas has 38 or 40 House seats. So what they do is they take the population of Texas, they divide it by 38 or 40 or whatever the number is, and they come up with that number. Okay, each congressional district in Texas must have exactly that number of people in it. Not more, not less. Exactly. Now, frankly, that's crazy. But again, it enables gerrymandering because now you have the ability to micromanage the district lines. You get into a situation where, say, in my neighborhood here, I might be in one House district, and my neighbor who lives across the street might be in another district. The line running right down the street between us. Why? Because that district needs one more person, not two more people. Ridiculous. Ludicrous. And yet, with modern computer capabilities, you can play these games. So it's like waving a red flag at people who want to gerrymander. Now, Texas is a Republican state, and they are, I understand, threatening right now, we're going to redraw our districts in order to try to eliminate 2 or 3 Democratic members of Congress. Well, if they were to do that, it would be a reaction to what Democrats have already done in Illinois, Maryland, New York, California, and a few other states. Yeah. So this gerrymandering is gleefully participated in by both parties. The narrative in the press is that the Republicans are doing this. This is a Republican thing. That's a false narrative. The Republicans do it where they can. Democrats do it where they can. To my knowledge, I know of one state that does not have this problem. That's the state of Iowa. Iowa. So what's magical about Iowa? Well, in Iowa, the district lines are not drawn by the politicians in the state legislature. They have an independent commission that does it. And that independent commission is truly independent and nonpartisan. Now, here in California, a number of years ago, they passed a ballot measure to take drawing the district lines out of the hands of the legislature and put it in the hands of an independent commission. But that independent commission in California is dominated by the Democrats and draws lines that benefit the Democrats. So essentially, and they're not alone, Arizona has the same problem. They have an independent commission that draws lines that benefit Democrats. So the mere fact of having an independent commission is in itself not a sufficient guarantee, and that's really frustrating. It should be. If you take this out of the hands of legislators, I remember the last time we had fair maps drawn in California was after the 1990 census. You might ask, what the hell happened then? Wasn't the legislature controlled by Democrats, and didn't they still draw the district lines? Yes, they did. But the governor was Pete Wilson, a Republican. So here's what happened. The Democrats drew the lines for the Assembly, the Senate, and the state U.S. House. Governor Wilson vetoed them. And the Democrats did not have 2/3 to pass them over the governor's veto. So essentially, there was a deadlock. The governor undertook to appoint a commission of his own. He composed it of retired state judges. He did not reach into the political realm. He reached into the judicial realm. So he put together this commission,
probably even worse,
of retired judges who proceeded to draw lines. And I'll tell you something. If you take a state and just look at the way the lines are drawn on it, even a person who is not really versed in this type of thing will be able to tell fairly quickly whether the lines are gerrymandered or not. If lines are drawn reasonably, they tend to look reasonable. And the lines that were drawn in 1991 actually looked reasonable. The lines you see on the California map today look as if somebody took a plate of spaghetti and heaved it at the map. This is what you get when you gerrymander. You get all these intricate little squiggles and curls. Because, we need to take in those 6 people over here, those 6 people. We need to take these Republicans out of that district and put these Democrats into that district. And you wind up with this very ugly map. And the California...
So you don't think it needs to be changed here, sir?
Well, as I said...
If it looks like spaghetti?
As I said, we tried it. We actually do now have an independent commission, but the independent commission is dominated by a partisan group that draws the districts to benefit Democrats. And so what should have been a reform has been defeated by politics in the state of California. That's really unthinkable, but that's what's happened. It's too bad. I'm hoping that perhaps, the proof is in the personnel. Perhaps there will come a time at which the independent district and commission in California will cease to be a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party. But right now, everything else is in California, so I see little cause for hope, particularly since, as I pointed out earlier in the hour, the next election for governor looks like there's not going to be any credible Republican running.
Yeah, I was listening to your presentation there. No, it doesn't look good for your Republicans. Honestly, I feel for you guys. Again, I'm more trying to lean for independent, or this libertarian person that I guess he looks like he's in his 20s. Nicholas Thompson. I'm not sure if you know of him. I guess he's running. He was on ballotmedia.org. His profile image isn't in there, but his website's there. You can click on his website. It gives you some of the bullet points and stuff.
Well, Evan, I would say this to you, who is sympathetic to a small party, the Libertarian Party. There are people who might like to be able to vote for a Green Party candidate. Or something of this nature. The way the California primary election operates today, there is one primary ballot. All candidates are listed on it. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, everybody. And people vote, they choose among these candidates, and if there's, a dozen of them or 20 of them, you get one vote and you vote for the one you want. And when the votes are counted, the 2 highest finishers then will run off against each other in the November election. In some districts, this results in 2 Republicans, or more likely 2 Democrats running against each other. In practice, it means that on the November ballot there will never be a Libertarian or a Green Party member or any other minor party member because they never get past this primary process. Now, it used to be California had closed primaries in which each political party in California, each legally registered party, and the Libertarians are indeed such, would conduct their own primary, nominate their own candidates, and have a line on the ballot in November. So I would urge you, join me in helping to put California's primary system back the way it was and get rid of this jungle primary that ensures less choice in the general election ballot and literally obliterates smaller parties.
Well, I'm glad to have called in today, and we agreed 100% on this topic, sir. I appreciate it. Thanks for the info as well. You do have your few minutes, so I'll leave your show to yours. So I appreciate it, and hopefully you'll get some other callers.
Thank you. Appreciate the call.
Thanks
on
again.
This topic of, I dislike seeing this gerrymandering. You know what it results in? There's an off-year election next year. 435 U.S. representatives will be elected. But how many of those members, there's 220 Republican members, only a couple of dozen of them will have serious re-election races. And the same thing on the other side. Because gerrymandering has succeeded in putting most Republicans and most Democrats into utterly safe districts. You take a look at the district that we have. Jimmy Panetta is the local congressman around here. His district takes in a lot of the city of San Jose, a lot of Santa Clara County, all of Santa Cruz County. Then it goes down along the coast of Monterey County and takes in a lot of San Luis Obispo County. Now, what's the purpose of doing that? Well, normally, if you had, say, Monterey and San Luis Obispo County, you'd have a district that might produce a Republican, or could conceivably. But when you take San Luis Obispo County, which is Republican, but you loop it in with a bunch of Santa Clara County, which has far more people, far more voters, and is overwhelmingly Democratic, what have you done? You neutralized, essentially neutered, Republican voters in a particular part of the state by hooking them up with this ridiculously shaped district. And what do the people of San Luis Obispo County have in common with the citizens of San Jose? Not a damn thing. So this is how it works. In November, you wind up with a House of Representatives where only a handful of districts nationwide will determine which party controls the House. Even if public opinion shifts considerably, you won't see that many seats change hands. That is, when members of Congress choose their own voters to keep themselves in office, that's what we're dealing with. It's 10 o'clock at Santa Cruz Voice. Okay, here is a little something on McKinley.
Talk. What, and not only that, but why is the serpent's punishment to...
Okay, there we go.
There are 4 presidents on Mount Rushmore: Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt. Were it not for a crazed assassin, the face of William McKinley, and not TR, very well could have been carved on that mountain. As it stands, the 25th President of the United States is almost an historical afterthought. And that's a shame, because as much as anyone, McKinley laid the foundation for American dominance of the 20th century. William McKinley was born on January 29, 1843 in Niles, Ohio. As far back as anyone could remember, he was sober, cautious, and responsible. He adored his deeply religious abolitionist mother. She wanted him to become a minister, but when the Civil War broke out, 18-year-old William joined the Union Army as a private. He wrote his sister that he had decided to serve my country in this, her perilous hour, from a sense of duty. He quickly came to the attention of his commanding officer, fellow Ohioan and future President Rutherford B. Hayes, who made McKinley his chief quartermaster. As even-tempered as McKinley was, he was not afraid of taking great risks if he thought they were necessary. At the bloody Battle of Antietam, he drove a wagon full of food and water through heavy enemy fire to desperate Union soldiers. God bless the lad, wrote Officer James Comely of McKinley's heroic action. Until the end of his life, McKinley preferred to be addressed by his final Army rank, Major, saying, "I earned that. I'm not so sure of the rest." At age 22, the veteran McKinley returned to Ohio intent on a legal career. He quickly established himself as an extremely competent attorney. In 1871, he married Ida Saxton, the daughter of a prominent local banker. They had 2 children, but both died tragically, one from typhoid fever at the age of 3, and one shortly after birth. These losses shattered Ida's physical and emotional health. McKinley remained devoted to his wife, often spending hours a day with her, even during the busiest times of his political career. McKinley was elected to Congress in 1876 and served there until 1891, ultimately becoming the chairman of the powerful Ways and Means Committee. His defining issue was the tariff. Like most Republicans of that era, he believed that American industry and workers needed protection from cheap foreign labor to thrive. The 1890 McKinley tariff cemented his thinking into law. It was on this issue that McKinley wanted to run as the 1896 Republican nominee for president. But the deciding issue turned out to be gold versus silver, specifically on which metal would the currency be based. McKinley was a sound money man. That is, he favored gold, the long-established foundation of the global economy. His Democratic opponent, William Jennings Bryan, favored silver. Crisscrossing the nation, Bryan famously proclaimed that "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." McKinley, however, calmly remained on his front porch, winning the argument and the election. Shortly after his presidency began, the gold issue faded, replaced by a brewing crisis 90 miles off the Florida coast. Cuban rebels were in full revolt against their Spanish overlords. Reports of Spanish atrocities outraged the American people. The popular press whipped this outrage into a frenzy. Demands for McKinley to intervene on the side of the Cuban freedom fighters were overwhelming. But McKinley had seen war up close and knew its horrible reality. Even when an explosion on February 15, 1898, destroyed the American battleship the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, killing over 250 sailors, the press insisting it was an act of Spanish aggression, McKinley held back. By this point, he was convinced that war was probably inevitable, but was worried that the Army and Navy were not fully prepared. Finally satisfied that America was ready, on April 25th, he signed a declaration of war. The Spanish-American War lasted less than 4 months, ending in an overwhelming American victory. There were 385 American battlefield deaths, roughly 2,000 more dying from tropical disease. The Spanish colonies of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines came under American control. Hawaii, now more critical than ever as a naval station, was also annexed. America had arrived as a global power, and everyone knew it. That included most American voters. In 1900, McKinley easily won his re-election for a second term. He came into his new term full of optimism. He had a strengthened majority in Congress and a vigorous new vice president, the governor of New York and hero of the recent war, Theodore Roosevelt. McKinley had an ambitious agenda. Among his goals were securing the victories of the Spanish-American War, opening international markets for trade, particularly in China, augmenting civil rights for blacks, and finalizing negotiations to start building the Panama Canal. And then, fate intervened. While attending the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, on September 6, 1901, McKinley was shot by a self-proclaimed anarchist. He died 8 days later. Teddy Roosevelt took up McKinley's mantle. In doing so, the charismatic new president permanently overshadowed his predecessor on his way to Mount Rushmore. Fair or unfair, that's how history frequently works. I'm Jason Edwards, professor of history and humanities at Grove City College for Prager University.
Thus goes. Okay. Welcome once again to News Talk on SantaCruzVoice.com. I'm Charles Freedman. It's 10:06. It's a lovely Thursday. Hope you're enjoying the day and the News Talk. We've had our first phone call today, but you can still be our second. 831-265-5050 is the number. Okay, economic news. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that before we move on to other subjects. The Federal Reserve Board has just met and decided what to do about interest rates, and once again, they have not changed them. They remain as they were. Two members of the Fed Board dissented. These two members each wanted a 1/4 point reduction in interest rates. Mr. Trump, the president, has been haranguing the Fed for a reduction in interest rates. It seems to me possible that if Mr. Trump had been a little bit less vocal, he might have gotten what he wanted. Now, why should I say that? Well, Mr. Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve Board, is a human being after all. And as Mr. Trump has found out in his dealings with people like Vladimir Putin, etc., and indeed in his negotiations throughout his life, human beings are human beings. They have human feelings. If you publicly harangue someone, you're going to do what I tell you to do, you make it more difficult for them to go along with you. Because if they acquiesce, if they then do as you want them to do, they give the appearance of weakness. They give the appearance of being subservient, of being dominated. Here's this guy comes along and says, you're going to do this, and maybe you were going to do it anyway. Maybe you wanted to do it, but now, if you do it, you look like a wuss. And so there's a temptation there. There's a pressure, a motivation to hold back. And frankly, I think that dynamic may be in action here. Frankly, if I were on the Federal Reserve Board right now, I got to admit, I would have voted to maintain rates as they are. I would certainly not countenance an increase. I saw somebody the other day was talking about raising rates. That's just ridiculous. But the last time the board dropped rates, they did so last fall by something like 0.5 point, and it turned out to be a mistake. Inflation was not yet fully under control, and to this date, it simply still isn't. Inflation still ranges between 2% and 3%. That is above the Fed's announced target rate of 2%, and frankly, that announced target rate of 2% is, in my view, too high. I would like to see inflation at about 1 to 1.5. A non-inflationary economy is, in my view, a very good thing. Price stability is important. And so the idea that we would continue to have a policy of maintaining current interest rates seems reasonable to me. And once again, in this particular case, I disagree with President Trump. I agree with him more often than I disagree with him, but there are times when I say, no, I'm sorry, I think you're wrong. Now, I have seen a number of pundits and commentators lately say, well, there was a tremendous prediction of huge economic dislocation and chaos after Mr. Trump's Conflagration Day announcement of tariffs. And that hasn't happened. Well, Mr. Trump backed off of most of his most extreme presentations. And as a result, the result we got was not what we would have had if he had stuck with his original presentation. He did not. Is that a criticism of President Trump from me? No. As a matter of fact, Mr. Trump said what he said, looked at the results and said, in the immortal words of Robert Woolsey, "Whoa!" and decided, maybe I better not do this. Maybe I better retrench. Maybe I better rethink this. And so, over a period of weeks, he consistently retrenched and drew back and gave ground. And it showed results. People who were looking at the draconian measures he had announced at the outset found that, well, no, it's not going to be that bad. Nevertheless, there have been problems. The Fed, in addition to taking action, in this particular case, not taking action, not changing interest rates, also issued a report, a detailed report on the condition of the United States economy. The analysts at the Wall Street Journal are some of the most competent there are. They come from a what should I say, a like-thinking ideological point. I mean, I'm a conservative, they're conservatives, so I'm comfortable with their analysis. If you think President Trump's tariff ructions don't affect the economy, take a gander at Wednesday's report for the second quarter gross domestic product. The economy grew 3% on an annual basis, but largely because imports collapsed. This may be the weirdest GDP report ever. The top line growth number looks good. The White House naturally touted it. It reverses the half-point decline in GDP in the first quarter, which was largely explained by a surge of imports as businesses tried to front-run anticipated tariffs. Yeah, if you know, starting 3 weeks from now, you're going to be paying these huge tariffs. Okay, I'll buy all I can before that happens. Once again, economics is really a science of human behavior. Human beings acting in their own best interests. If I buy today, I can save money. So I'm going to do it. Wow. Rocket science? No. No, I don't think so. Just simple human behavior. Growth in the first half, January through June, was 1.2%. A very mediocre number. Most striking are the second quarter report's wild internal details. Net exports minus imports, added a remarkable 5% to GDP as imports fell 30%. Holy moly! You know the old adage, if you want less of something, put a tax on it. You want people not to smoke so much, put exorbitant taxes on tobacco products. You want people to import less, put huge taxes on imports. Well, by golly, a 30% decrease in imports. Imports subtract from growth in the national accounts because GDP measures domestic production. Imports are produced overseas, but imports are still crucial to U.S. economic well-being because consumers buy them, and businesses use them as inputs for what they produce, and often then export. The crazy swing in imports shows just how much Mr. Trump's up-and-down trade policies have disrupted business decisions and left companies scrambling to adapt. This seems to have had a negative effect on private domestic investment, which fell 15% in the second quarter, after surging in the first. Non-residential business investment contributed only 1/4 point to GDP as businesses rapidly drew down their inventories. Chalk this up as another result of the uncertainty caused by on-again, off-again tariffs. The U.S. consumer was less affected, contributing 1 full point to GDP. Decent, if hardly bullish, but it's noticeable that final sales to private domestic purchasers, a key measure of demand, rose only 1.2%. That's the lowest since the fourth quarter of 2022. The best news in the report concerned prices. Price index for domestic purchases rose 1.9% in the quarter, a big drop from a 3.4% increase in the first. Personal consumption expenditures index, including food and energy, the inflation measure watched most closely by the Fed, rose 2.5% versus 3.5% in the first quarter. Once again, notice these numbers. The Fed's inflation target is 2%, 2.0. First quarter was 3.5. That's nearly double their target. This time it's 2.5. That's an improvement. But it is still 25% over their target number. If you want to know why interest rates were not cut, there's your answer. That's not far from the Fed's 2% goal, as Jerome Powell pointed out Wednesday after the central bank's latest monetary discussion. The Fed stood pat on interest rates, albeit with two dissenters on the open market committee who wanted a quarter-point cut. Stock and bond prices moved down as investors seemed disappointed that Mr. Powell wasn't clearer about a rate cut in September, but financial conditions hardly seemed overly restrictive. Mr. Trump probably hurt his case for a rate cut with his Fed bashing. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. If you want somebody to do something, don't publicly abuse them, because if you do, they're going to be less inclined to go along with you. What does this bode for the rest of the year? The second quarter was all but over before the passage of the tax and budget bill with its new incentives for business investment. Full and immediate expensing for business is likely to boost investment in the second half, and it had better to offset the impact of willy-nilly trade policy. The one big beautiful bill could save the Trump economy. The other message to Mr. Trump is to finish his trade deals with the world so companies can finally figure out how to adjust their supply chains and what their future costs will be. Give them stability. This may be a forlorn hope, given that Mr. Trump views tools as an all-purpose tariffs as an all-purpose diplomatic tool. See his now a 50% tariff on Brazil because it's prosecuting his friend. There's no recession signal in the second quarter numbers, but there's no boom either. The best path to a real golden age is to calm trade and migrant deportation uncertainty, ease regulatory bottlenecks, and unleash American business to invest and create jobs. That's what Trump did in his first administration, and that's most notably what Reagan did so successfully in the 1980s, which won us not one but two entire decades of prosperity. The Reagan economic policies were the most successful economic policies of the post-war era. That's simply a fact. Okay, is it half past yet? Not quite. Okay, we'll handle one more. Are we? No calls at the moment. Okay, 831-265-5050, the number if you have something you'd like to contribute. I had a story yesterday concerning a decision made at the FDA to back off of the drug company Sarepta, which has a remedy for a rare form of degenerative disease that affects young men. Today, there's a little more on that story. Dr. Vinay Prasad is now out of a job. This is a hematologist. He's also a Bernie Sanders fan. He is now stepping down as head of the Food and Drug Administration's gene therapy and vaccine shop after only 3 months on the job. You might be asking, why in the world would the Trump administration be appointing Bernie Sanders fans to anything? Well, the answer is because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wanted him. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was also in a Bernie Sanders fan. This is welcome news, but there's still reason to keep a cautious eye on the agency that could assist or stymie U.S. drug innovation in this era of great biotech advances. A Health and Human Services Department spokesman said Tuesday night that Dr. Prasad is resigning because he doesn't want to be a distraction. Truth is, he was under heavy criticism from patients and from these pages for undermining the administration's goal of fast-tracking life-saving treatments. Dr. Prasad may have been chosen for the gene therapy and vaccine job because he found common cause with conservatives in opposing the leftist COVID policies. But the White House personnel shop must have missed that the doctor has long criticized the FDA from the left. He thinks the agency approves too many drugs whose costs, in his view, don't justify their benefits. He wanted to turn the agency into a de facto rationing body that focuses on drug cost as much as safety and efficiency. But cost isn't the FDA's job. This is the left's business model. The pharmaceutical industry is supposed to develop new drugs which they then give away for free or at cost. And you can't do that. The modern pharmaceutical industry maintains laboratories that cost gazillions of dollars. Who staffs those laboratories? Scientists. Very, very highly trained and educated scientists whose education alone has cost gazillions of dollars. That's right. You want to talk about student loans. These people have got over the top. So what do we know about them? They need to make a lot of money. They deserve to make a lot of money. They're doing work that only a tiny handful of people in the world can do. Work that saves lives, work that ameliorates the suffering of fellow human beings. Arguably the most valuable work on the face of the planet. So they have very expensive laboratories and very expensive people staffing those laboratories, and yet the left expects them to then take the product of all of this investment and give it away. This is your typical utopian claptrap. Where do drugs come from? They come out of the sky. And a drug company has them, so the drug company is obligated to simply give them away. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. And if you try doing it that way, you won't get any more drugs because you won't have the money to fund the expensive laboratories and the very highly paid, and justifiably so, people working in them. Well, gee, does that mean that new medicines are going to be expensive? Yes, it does. Like a lot of other things. Try looking at a price tag on a new car these days. Think about what that new car cost, say, 50 years ago. I can remember a time when you could think about buying a new car for $3,000. Now that'll get you a fender. Maybe. You say inflation? Yeah, inflation, but it's gone way beyond that. The cars are far more, what should I say? Let's use a positive word, far more sophisticated now. Far more engineering. Cars in those days didn't have any computers on them. Nothing did. Nowadays, a typical automobile is totally computerized. Helps it run more efficiently. There's reasons for all that. Gasoline that passes through a car today is much more completely burned. You get the energy out of it instead of passing it out the tailpipe as smog. That's a good thing, but it costs money in terms of the cost of the automobile. And again, when it comes to developing sophisticated pharmaceuticals, you can raise that factor to the nth degree. So this Dr. Prasad is one of these people who was focused on telling drug companies, okay, you can develop this drug, but you can't charge for it. The cost is too high. But Dr. Prasad, you don't have the disease. On Dr. Prasad's new watch, FDA has torpedoed several promising treatments for rare and deadly diseases. This includes an immunotherapy shot that helped a third of advanced melanoma patients who had relapsed after other treatments. With these disapprovals, the agency moved its standards for drug approvals and blindsided companies. Then came the Sarepta mugging, which we told you about on Sunday. The agency used the deaths of 2 boys out of nearly 1,000 who had been treated with Sarepta Therapeutics gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy as a reason to force the drug off the market. It ignored the clear benefits in slowing disease progression. The FDA wisely backed down on Monday amid an outcry from parents and criticism in these pages. The agency's lack of clear, predictable standards under Dr. Prasad was creating enormous uncertainty for the industry, especially the small biotech companies, and threatened to chill investment. Dr. Prasad's inflexible positions on the design of clinical trials also risk slowing and raising costs for drug development. This is the opposite of what FDA Commissioner Marty Makary says he wants to do. Why does it take over 10 years for a drug to come to the market? Dr. Makary mused Wednesday on CNBC. One reason, he said, is FDA bureaucracy. We don't want the FDA to be a black box. Markets want predictability. Yes, they do. But as for the agent's reasonably arbitrary rejection of therapies, he demurred. He hailed Dr. Prasad as a genius, noting he was a prolific author of papers, many of which argued that drugs aren't worth their cost. As if this were a mark of wisdom or the right credential to be a regulator. Dr. Makary said, "We're going to continue to talk to Dr. Prasad," which suggests the ousted official may continue to influence agency decisions from the cheap seats. Dr. Makary said that Stanford Professor George Tidmarsh will lead the agency's drug reviewers, which is not reassuring. In April, Dr. Tidmarsh slammed previous FDA leaders for giving false hope to patients by approving experimental therapies that cost vast amounts of money that our health care system can ill afford. He singled out Sarepta's Duchenne drug. This won't buoy confidence in the agency. The FDA Commissioner's public support for innovation conflicts with personnel decisions and agency actions. Will the real Dr. Makary please stand up? It is 10:30. We will pause for messages and then return. It is halfway through the program. Great time for you to call 831-265-5050.
Cannabis is one of nature's most beneficial plants, and at Treehouse Dispensary, we use it to build community. In addition to dispensing cannabis and education, Treehouse hosts First Friday events every month that feature our community's local artists, makers, and activists. If you're 21 plus, join us at 3651 Soquel Drive every First Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. to enjoy the work of local artists and musicians, find one-of-a-kind gifts, and learn more about the top cannabis products in California. See you soon.
I've got a question for you. Do you want a lower car payment? Just a phone call? You know, most people buy a car and they pay whatever the car dealer says their interest rate is, and they forget payments. But did you know there is a secret in your contract that allows another company to dance any car payment to try and lower it? It's true. There is indeed a company out there that knows the ins and, more importantly, the outs on car loans, and they know how to lower your current car payments. It's easy and fast, and you could have a lower car payment next month. Make this free call right now and find out if you could lower your existing car payment. Call the Car Savings Hotline right now. They're free.
Call now. 800-471-4435. 800-471-4435. 800-471-4435. That's 800-471-4435.
You never get a second chance to make a good first impression. When you want to make a good first impression, start with Dynamic Press Angelo.
Dynamic Press can take care of every printing need, from business cards to stationery, apparel, mailings, brochures, everything but money.
When you want to make a good first impression, start with Dynamic Press in Santa Cruz.
479-7920. DynamicPress.com.
I really should have my head examined. I began today's program, usual assortment of things to talk about, and I forgot to mention I won't be here tomorrow. I've arranged to take the day off. I have some things I have to take care of. I'll be back on Monday, so it's just a one-day thing. But when you turn in tomorrow, you'll be hearing a previously recorded program. So that's the explanation of why. And here it is halfway through today's show, and I'm finally getting around to mentioning this. I don't know. Why in the world would I do that? Why would I forget all about it? Well, it has to do with me, and I guess I'm not all that full of myself. I don't consider me the important thing on the program, so I forgot to say anything about that. Enough for psychoanalysis. Okay, let's go to something that's a little bit less heavy-duty, you know. Have you noticed that the latest cultural flap is about a jeans ad featuring a young lady named Sydney Sweeney? Now, I looked at some commentary about this on YouTube, and they showed some of these ads. And this Sydney Sweeney's a really hot chick. She's 27, blonde, blue eyes, lovely body, and just the type of person who would model blue jeans. I remember a number of years ago, Brooke Shields, a similarly attractive young woman, was modeling blue jeans. So, and occasionally some male hotness is stuffed into blue jeans so that people can say, oh, hey, he looks good in blue jeans. Newsflash, this is how you sell blue jeans. You take attractive people, put them in the jeans, and then put them on television, and of course the implication is you too can be hot if you buy our jeans. Now, obviously that's not necessarily so, but let's just say that it is a successful sales tactic that has been proven to work over generations. So if you want to sell jeans, this is what you do. Well, Sydney Sweeney is now being pilloried for this. The advertising campaign shows her great jeans with a playful reference to genes, as in genetics. In other words, not everybody is built or looks like Sydney Sweeney. Her genetic makeup has produced a hotness. Not every human being's genetic makeup produces a hotness. This is something I've been aware of every time I've looked in a mirror my entire life. I look at myself and then I look at Clark Gable and I think, gee whiz, no. Right? And I'm sure that the female of the species has the same frustrations occasionally. So, great genes, Sydney Sweeney. Genes are passed down from parent to offspring, often determine traits like hair color, personality, even eye color. Sydney says in one ad, my genes are blue. It's clever. It's fun. It's effective advertising. So why am I talking about this? Liberals have lost their minds over it. This is another one of those funny moments. They are accusing American Eagle, that's the company that makes the jeans, and Sydney Sweeney of sending a racist message. Some have outright called these ads Nazi propaganda, white supremacy. Wow! How insanely... I mean, these people must have little radar things around, you know, like a Portuguese man of war or a sea anemone. They have these filaments that they spread out. And they're looking for anything that disturbs one of their filaments, and when it does, they go bananas. Over the years, from time to time, I have likened modern leftists to the Puritans of colonial times. Here's an example of exactly what I'm talking about. This is the kind of thing Cotton Mather would have come up with. In a certain Massachusetts town, Sydney Sweeney might have found herself accused of witchcraft. Not too far a cry. It's a ridiculous overreaction to an advertisement featuring a successful, attractive celebrity. And it's the latest example of how the left refuses to let go of their woke agenda and identity politics, which were rejected in the last election. Is Sydney Sweeney's jeans ad tone deaf? No. American Eagle announced its collaboration with Sweeney on July 23rd. Its stock went up, signaling the market understood, hey, this is a smart move. They're going to sell some jeans here. They're going to sell some pants. Sweeney's girl next door charm and main character energy, paired with her ability not to take herself too seriously, is the hallmark of this bold, playful campaign. The fall campaign features the Sydney Jean, created in partnership with Sweeney. All the revenue from the sales will be donated to the Crisis text line, which offers free mental health support. Rather than focus on the positive, however, leftists turn to mob mode, calling names and threatening to boycott the company and Sweeney. During a time when DEI is under attack and there are mass deportations occurring daily, an ad campaign centering how awesome it is to be white and blonde-haired and blue-eyed reads as rather tone-deaf. A writer for Vulture muses, Vulture. That's a fascinating choice of name for a publication, and in my view, very apt. Vanity Fair asks, another rather aptly chosen name, does Sydney Sweeney have great genes, or has the American Eagle brand simply had a very, very bad idea? While noting that the campaign is based on a play on words that may seem harmless, but has been criticized by onlookers who see a sinister message lurking beneath the pun. Yes, because they are looking for that and nothing else. Yet that same Vulture article also mentioned how Sweeney's ad campaign is a direct nod to one that Brooke Shields did for Calvin Klein in the 1980s. You see, I thought I remembered that. It turns out that I really do. Maybe the American Eagle Sweeney collection is simply a throwback and not eugenics promoting. In a recent interview with NPR, former Biden Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, rumored 2028 presidential contender, acknowledged Democrats have been slow to understand some of the cultural changes that have been happening. I think there's a perception Democrats become so focused on identity, we no longer have a message that can actually speak to people across the board. Or we were only for you if you fit into a certain identity bucket. Well, duh. That's exactly what Democrats have done, focusing on race and gender identity to the point that it's ostracized a large number of voters. Whether progressives, leftists want to admit it, the country is still majority white. People are tired of being made to feel evil or unworthy simply because of characteristics they were born with and cannot possibly change. No one should be made to feel that way. Companies and colleges are starting to roll back their diversity, equity, and inclusion adherence that has felt oppressive in recent years and has led to more division, not less. Sydney Sweeney is a young woman who's capitalizing on her good looks and charm. Good for her. And good for American Eagle for bucking the trend. These words written by Ingrid Jacques, who is a columnist at USA Today. So it's worth noting that the author of this is a female, and thus, I think, uniquely qualified to comment on the topic. Let me see here. There's another story about DEI today. This one has nothing to do with selling jeans. Instead, it has to do with a very highly sophisticated academic pursuit. Colin Wright is an evolutionary biologist, and he wrote this: I'm filing a complaint against Cornell University, that's quite a blue ribbon institution, for racial discrimination. This isn't a political stunt or a publicity grab. It's a last resort in response to a gross injustice that destroyed a career I spent more than a decade building. It's about holding accountable a powerful institution that violated the law, abandoned its principles and discriminated against me because of my race. I am an evolutionary biologist, a liberal, and a first-generation college graduate. I dreamed of being a scientist for as long as I could remember. I pursued that passion for more than 12 years. I earned a doctorate from the University of California, Santa Barbara. I completed postdoctoral work at Pennsylvania State University. Along the way, I was awarded a competitive NSF Graduate Research Fellowship and published nearly 30 peer-reviewed papers in leading academic journals. For my career stage, I was among the top in my field. I applied to countless tenure-track positions across the country in 2019 and 2020. One of these applications went to Cornell for a position in neurobiology and behavior department. Unknown to me, a few months later, Cornell initiated a separate search for a faculty member in evolutionary biology, my exact field. But they kept it confidential. Internet emails now show this was no accident. Last month, the America First Policy Institute released internal Cornell emails showing the university conducted an effort to recruit what the search committee referred to as a diversity hire. One committee member described the process bluntly. What we should be doing is inviting one person whom we've identified as being somebody that we would like to join our department and not have that person in competition with any others. That somebody who is black was selected not because of research excellence, but because of race. I was denied the chance to compete. So were other academics who might have been qualified. This discriminatory practice, conducted in coordination with the Cornell Office of the Provost, led at the time by current Cornell President Michael Kotnikoff, violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination on the basis of race. Isn't it just that simple? There is black-letter federal law that's been on the books for 60 years that prohibits racial discrimination. You can't do that. You know what this reminds me of? I've shared with you 14th Amendment. This comes from, let me see, 14th Amendment, 1868. Included in the language of Section 1. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That became part of the Constitution of the United States in 1869. Under that language, the black codes, which have come to be known as Jim Crow laws, they couldn't exist. They're all illegal. All of the legal construct that came to be known as, what was the word? Not systemic, institutional racism. It was all unconstitutional for the entire period of time that it existed. And yet it did. And why? Because of the Supreme Court. Because the courts, in their infinite wisdom, refused to simply read and enforce the law. Laws that had been made by elected representatives who have the legislative power. Who says so? The Constitution. Article 1, Section 1. So important that it's literally the first language in the Constitution of the United States. The people's elected representatives make the laws. The people's representatives are the ones who amend the Constitution, and that's what the 14th Amendment did back in 1869. Made racial discrimination illegal. And yet it went on for 100 years. Until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was once again this codified in law the illegality of racial discrimination, and yet it still goes on. And today, it's interesting. The people who scream that, you would think that this gives some credence to those who now say racism is absolutely endemic in the American spirit. You can make it unconstitutional, it still happens. You make it illegal, it still happens. And yet now they're the ones who are doing it. The left today is promoting racial discrimination. That's actually something new and different. It used to be that the people promoting racial discrimination were usually politically on the right. Not necessarily, of course. There were plenty of lefty socialist racists. But in today's America, calls for racial discrimination are coming most loudly from the left, the same people who scream that the country is inherently racist. Yeah, and you're working like hell to keep it that way, aren't you? That's why, with representation from the America First Policy Institute, I'm taking legal action against Cornell University. What makes this worse is the university's continued dishonesty. This year, the university president, Mr. Kotlikoff, wrote, "We do not exclude anyone at Cornell for reasons irrelevant to merit. Neither do we admit or evaluate students, hire or promote employees, award chairs or tenure, or make any other merit-driven decisions at Cornell based on race, ethnicity, or other attributes not relevant to merit. Leaked documents show otherwise." So you deny you do it, and then you do it. Wow. In addition to orchestrating the discriminatory hiring scheme, Cornell created other racially filtered hiring pipelines, including a $16 million National Institute of Health-funded initiative called the Faculty Institutional Recruitment for Sustainable Transformation, or FIRST. FIRST. Love those acronyms. This program has stated purpose of which is, quote, enhancing compositional diversity, unquote, required hiring committees to revise applicant lists repeatedly until they were diverse enough. If the applicant pool wasn't diverse enough, the process was paused for additional robust outreach. Imagine if the races were reversed. Suppose a whistleblower uncovered internal emails showing that the university had run a secret search to ensure that qualified black applicants were excluded from consideration. Suppose the school selected only white candidates to produce a racially predetermined outcome. There would rightfully be national outrage. It would be a landmark civil rights case. That's exactly what Cornell did. Only I'm white. I left academia in 2020 because I realized that no publication, no study, no breakthrough, nothing I could contribute would open the doors that should have opened. That realization was maddening. Can you imagine working over a dozen years doing this very sophisticated and complex study to fit yourself for a career as an evolutionary biologist and then finding that you weren't the right color? We now look at horror stories of the bad old days in the United States of America when that happened to black people, happened to Oriental people, happened to Hispanics. This caucus is for us Caucasians. Yeah, right. Affirmative action. The idea of the Civil Rights Revolution, the idea of the Warren Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision, that's one thing they sure as hell got right. And on today's Supreme Court, there's a justice who says, the way to end racial discrimination is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And for making that statement, the modern left is pillorying him. Unbelievable. I left academia in 2020. I realized that nothing was going to open doors that should have opened. The realization was maddening, not because I lacked merit, but because of insidious racial discrimination. Across academia, qualified scholars were sidelined, forced to submit DEI statements that functioned as ideological loyalty oaths and racial litmus tests. Discriminatory DEI policies represent a systemic rot that has weakened the public's trust in science and demoralized a generation of scholars. After leaving academia, I spent a year at the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, fighting the ideology that had pushed me out. I've spent the past 5 years using my voice and platform to defend the principle of colorblind merit, under which success is determined by skill and hard work, not skin color. Now I'm taking that fight to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In response to a journal editor's inquiry, a university spokeswoman provided a link to a June 27th statement which says that Cornell strictly prohibits unlawful bias or discrimination. The statement was issued in response to an earlier informal complaint that the America First Policy Institute filed with multiple federal agencies. The statement says Cornell strongly disputes the allegations. Cornell declined to comment on my EEOC complaint. Last week, Columbia University agreed to pay more than $220 million and adopt sweeping reforms after a federal investigation uncovered civil rights violations. Before the Trump administration finalizes similar deals with other universities such as Harvard, Princeton, and Cornell, it should consider any case as evidence that the problem runs much deeper. Race-based hiring practices have harmed countless qualified scholars and demand serious scrutiny. Let my case serve as a warning. There is a price for violating the civil rights of an American. I wonder if years ago, and when these pieces of legislation were being passed, and when Dr. King was traveling the country and appearing at the Capitol Mall and giving that incredibly moving talk of his about being judged by the content of the character rather than the color of the skin, how would Dr. King and other members of his organization felt if he'd been told, a lifetime from now, 60 years from now, these laws that you have just helped pass are going to be used to benefit white people who have been unfairly treated, discriminated against on the basis of their race. I don't think Dr. King would have been able to understand it. I was around at that time. I was a supporter of the civil rights revolution and movement. I always a person who agreed that all people should be treated as individuals. That's the way I was raised. That's what Mom taught me. Anything less was injustice. I supported the Union, Mr. Lincoln, the Constitution as amended. Equal treatment for people of all races, creeds, and colors. What would I have thought if somebody had told me, well, by the time you're an old guy, there are going to be white people who are going to have to use this law to try to defend themselves against discrimination in very high places, in very distinguished venues. Cornell University, for gosh sakes, one of the top colleges in the country. Amazing. Just amazing. 21st century. Oh, there's an interesting image. Did you hear about this? Cory Booker, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, went to the floor of the Senate, and I guess they're calling him Senator Spartacus Returns. He essentially got up on his hind legs and gave a harangue in which he was upset all to hell and gone with his fellow Democrats. Once again, a parade of screaming, yelling, shaming, denouncing, etc., etc. I can't help but wonder what Senator Booker wants his fellow Democrats to do. Chain themselves to their desks? Perhaps they might take a page from the Trump people back January 6th, have a riot at the Capitol. I wonder. But I can tell you this, the actual effect of Mr. Booker's tantrum is going to be negligible. And I can tell you, I think, why he did it. Here's a fellow from a pretty Democratic state. Senator Booker's reelection is not really questionable. I'd love to see it be, but this was something he did in order to make some money. There are going to be a number of left-oriented people, you know, the same kind of whack jobs who think Sidney Sweeney's a Nazi. They're going to see Cory Booker do this, and they're going to say, oh, I got to send him $10, or I got to send him $50 or whatever. And they'll go online and they'll do that. And his campaign will, you know, his campaign fundraiser will be that much higher. And Mr. Booker, of course, like other members of Congress in safe constituencies, will use that money to fund the campaigns of fellow Democrats who will then be indebted to him. That, incidentally, is how Nancy Pelosi succeeded in running a House of Representatives with such an iron fist for so many years. She raised literally tons of money. I mean, millions and millions and tens, hundreds of millions of dollars. And she would then distribute this largesse, Lady Bountiful, among House Democrats, unless, of course, you crossed her. The understanding was very clear. I have money for you, lots of money. When I need your vote, you be there. And I don't want to hear a word about how unpopular it is with your constituents, or how it offends your conscience, or anything else. I've paid for your vote, and you will deliver it. It's the way the Democrats do business. Are you saying Republicans are different? Yeah, I am. Look at the way Republican speakers have been ousted from the position. No Republican has been able to do or has done what Nancy Pelosi did. Republican members aren't of the same type of mentality. For better or worse, they're a bunch of independent thinkers. And if you want them to go along, you don't walk up to them with a bunch of cash. They'll get offended. You try to buy my vote and they'll mean it. No, you got to sweet talk them. And that's even harder. If you don't believe me, ask Mike Johnson. Okay. Almost time for news and weather here on Santa Cruz Voice. I will be back for hour number 3 presently. Just now it's 11 o'clock. Thank you for being with us on this Thursday.
Few American leaders have stirred more controversy than Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States. Many admire him, many don't. But one point on which everyone agrees is his profound impact on American history. The reasons for the controversy and the impact are one and the same. Wilson and his generation of leaders were the first to challenge the founding principles of the country. It's not an exaggeration to say that Wilson turned them upside down. As expressed in the Declaration of Independence, the founders believed that individuals are born with certain unalienable rights, and they framed the Constitution to protect those rights. For Wilson, the time of individual rights had passed. In his view, 18th century America had little relevance to early 20th century America. The country, now much bigger and more complex, required the guidance of a benevolent government. America had literally outgrown the founders. Wilson's philosophy, of which he was a leading proponent, was known as progressivism, and Wilson proudly called himself a progressive. Where did Wilson get these ideas? From the place where he spent most of his life, the halls of academia. He was the only U.S. president to come into office with a Ph.D. Born in Stanton, Virginia on December 28, 1856, Woodrow Wilson had two ambitions, to teach and to write. He received his undergraduate degree from Princeton with the vague notion that he would become a lawyer. But like another earlier president, John Quincy Adams, Wilson found the law much too arid for his active mind. To the chagrin of his father, he returned to academia to get an advanced degree at Johns Hopkins. There his thinking took form. He was deeply influenced by Charles Darwin's new theory of evolution. At Hopkins, this theory was applied to government. Just as a species must adapt or progress to survive, so must a government. Not to recognize this would be to hold America back, to stunt its growth, or to close the metaphor, risk extinction. This was one of the major themes in Wilson's Ph.D. thesis, which he turned into an influential book titled Congressional Government, A Study in American Politics. This book launched his academic career, which culminated in his appointment as president of Princeton in 1902. As happy as he was at Princeton, Wilson longed to put his progressive ideas to the test, hence his move into politics. There his rise was truly meteoric. In 1910, he ran successfully for governor of New Jersey as a Democrat. Once in office, he surprised everyone with his impressive political skills, scoring one policy victory after another while also fighting New Jersey's notoriously corrupt political machine. Reforming workers' compensation, limiting how much money corporations could spend on elections, and putting utilities under state supervision were only three of the progressive ideas he pushed through the legislature. His success attracted the attention of progressives nationwide. In 1912, the Democratic Party, desperate to end a 16-year losing streak, turned to Wilson as its nominee. The chances of Wilson winning that election against a united Republican Party were slim. But the electoral calculus changed dramatically when former Republican President Teddy Roosevelt decided to run against his own hand-picked successor, the current Republican President, William Taft. TR's campaign was the most successful third-party run in American history, but all it accomplished was to split the Republicans and give Wilson an easy victory. He won with 42% of the popular vote, the lowest percentage since Lincoln. In just 3 years, Wilson had risen from president of Princeton to president of the United States. As he did as governor, he immediately went to work. Wilson made the new income tax, only recently ratified by the 16th Amendment, the most important source of government revenue. He put the nation's banking system under federal control by establishing the Federal Reserve System and strengthened regulations to rein in private business. But more than specific legislative wins, Wilson's program marked the arrival of the idea that government was not merely the servant of the people, but its savior. Ironically, he entitled his program The New Freedom. Unfortunately, this didn't apply to Black Americans. If anything, they saw their freedoms curtailed during Wilson's presidency. Unsympathetic to Black civil rights concerns, he resegregated the federal government, which previous Republican administrations had worked to integrate. On the other hand, he did appoint the first Jewish Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, one of the few people from whom Wilson would actually take advice. Like all effective leaders, Wilson had a clear vision of what he wanted to accomplish: to reshape Americans' view of government, and in that, he ultimately succeeded. His second term would present a whole new set of challenges. A terrible storm was brewing in Europe. It would give Wilson an opportunity not only to further change America, but to change the world. I'm R.J. Pastrito, professor of politics at Hillsdale College and author of Woodrow Wilson and the Roots of Modern Liberalism for Prager University.
Wilson, my God, my opinion. Ooh, hey. About time we, Once again, welcome to the Charles Freedman radio program here on Santa Cruz Voice. Hour number 3 begins. It is 11:06. The telephone number is 831-265-5050. I would be delighted to share some time with you. Yesterday, we talked at considerable length about the problems with Gaza. I would like to just briefly mention one of the points I made yesterday is that the representations that you are seeing in the media of maltreated and starving Gazans, in particular children, are today being revealed as essentially propaganda that Hamas has put forward and that Western sources are promoting. And there's nothing new about this. Hamas propaganda has been amplified by Western news sources for many years now. And so this is one more false narrative that they push. The fact of the matter is that Israel and the United States have provided tons and tons of aid, which the United Nations refuses to deliver, and which efforts, this is one thing where I think the United States and Israel can be held accountable. Push the UN out of the way. Simply set up distribution centers for this aid, make it clear, hey, we have enough for everybody, so there's no need to push and shove, and distribute it. But of course, if this is done, Hamas will, shall I say, react. So, well, it's just one more example of the intractability of that situation. Okay, moving on. We've taken out enough time on that issue, I think, in the last few days. Moving on to other things. In the U.S. Senate, a vote was taken on weapons sales to Israel. Normally, this is not a controversial matter, but this time it was challenged. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent from Vermont, who, as you know, you listen to Senator Sanders speak, it's obviously he's from Brooklyn. He's got that accent. Senator Sanders also, like many people from Brooklyn, is himself Jewish. And yet his leftist politics are more important to him than his heritage. A record number of Senate Democrats, more than half of them, voted in favor of two resolutions to block U.S. military sales to Israel. That happened last night. While the resolutions ultimately failed, the vote demonstrated how Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has fractured historically bipartisan support in Congress over the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. Once again, it is Hamas that has succeeded in doing this. The resolutions, sponsored by Senator Bernie Sanders, failed in the face of all Republicans voting against and 20 Democrats. Senators voted 27 in favor, 70 against, defeating Sanders' resolution, which sought to block more than $675 million in weapons sales to Israel. A second resolution garnered 24 in favor, 73 against. That one sought to prohibit the sale of tens of thousands of fully automatic rifles. Whatever happens tonight, history will condemn those of us who failed to act in the face of these horrors, Sanders said. It was the third time Sanders had put senators on record over their military support for Israel. Democrats framed their opposition to military aid as a protest against Netanyahu. I mean, it's the same type of distortion we hear. We have no problem with Jewish people. We just don't like Zionists. That's the distinction. Well, what's a Zionist? A Zionist is somebody who believes that the Jewish people have a nation in Israel. So if you're willing to, once again, as has happened so many times in the Bible throughout history, if you're willing as a Jewish person to once again sacrifice your homeland, sacrifice your birthright, give up what has been won at such dreadful cost, then we have no problem with you. But as always, it's a false bargain. Because once you give up Israel, do you really think the anti-Semitism is going to stop? All of a sudden, oh, you gave up Israel. Now you're a good Jew. We love you. Everything's fine. Please, Mr. Hemingway. No, the Jewish people are smart enough to understand that one of the major reasons for them maintaining Israel is because this maintains their ability to defend themselves against these practices which do not end and do not cease and are not going away. The oldest injustice in the world. It's not stopping anytime soon. 831-265-5050 is the telephone number. We have a disaster in Midtown Manhattan, a mass shooting that developed. I'm looking at, let me see here. I see a picture here of this guy who did this shooting, this dreadful shooting, and it's amazing. Am I the only person who sees the resemblance to Vladimir Putin? I mean, I understand his complexion isn't the same, but the shape of the head, the shape of the eyes, this guy looks like a younger, darker version of Vladimir Putin. No wonder he went nuts and started drilling people. Let's see here. What else we got? Yeah, Trump administration. Top stories today on Real Clear Politics. Trump to set 15% tariff on Korean imports. Second story. Trump hits India with 25% tariff plus penalty for trade with Russia. I mean, the idea of using American tariff policy or trade policy damage Russia economically. Hey, I'm all for that. Russia is an enemy. Remember back in 2012 where somebody asked what was going to be America's main geopolitical problem, and candidate Mitt Romney said Russia, and Barack Obama laughed at him. He said, "Ho ho ho, the '80s called. They want their foreign policy back." Yeah, Obama was able to turn that to his advantage politically. Smart political message, but he was dead wrong, of course. And today, if President Trump is coming round to the idea that opposing Russia, and that's opposing Putin. Putin is Russia, just as any dictator. Fidel Castro was Cuba. Today, Nicolas Maduro is Venezuela. These are not just one-party states; they are one-man states. Everybody else, well, whatever you have, it is a dispensation from El Hombre. And outside of El Hombre, there is, and you have, nothing. And that's our social organization here in Russia. So Mr. Trump is seeking to use tariff policy sanctions against Russia. Hey, economic policies brought down the Soviet Union, so I'm not scoffing at this. If it's done right, it's effective as all hell. And it doesn't get anybody killed. Isn't that nice? You can win a war. You can win without the killing. That greatly appealed to Ronald Reagan. I think it will greatly appeal to Donald Trump when he sees his way clear. But these other tariff policies on a daily basis continuing to throw monkey wrenches into the ability of businesses to plan, to get the things they need, to build the products they build, sooner or later, This has got to stop. In his little piece earlier that I shared with you, Michael Barone said it's possibly that the one big, beautiful bill can save Trump's economy. It can. I believe that. I think that the consequences from that bill, the results of it, are going to be positive, provided Mr. Trump allows them to be. And to the extent that he continues to essentially create chaos in markets and supply chains, he works against his own announced interests and against America's best interests, too. So my counsel to him would be, knock it off. Enough already. Carl is on the line, and I am so glad to hear from him. Let's talk. Hi, Carl. How are you?
Good morning, Charles. I'm good. I wanted to mention that it seemed it was about 2 weeks ago. There was this hoopla about some sheiks were getting together with the Palestinian Authority, and they were talking about we're going to reject Hamas and we'll treat with Israel and make the Gaza and West Bank thing good again. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember reading pieces that reflected that, and at the time, obviously, this is something that is in its infancy. It is nascent. The question is whether this movement can actually gain traction and be effective and successful. I don't have a guess as to whether that will happen or not.
And I don't either, but you haven't heard any more about it. It's just kind of okay.
Well, I've heard so far there have been two things. First of all, there was a piece written by a clan leader in Ramallah, which is in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. And then
that's one of the refugee camps.
A couple of weeks later, there was a piece from a clan leader in Rafah, which is in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. So this is a different location altogether. And so, but basically the same dynamic at work. And so I'm seeing, it's like in the spring, you see these little shoots come up, and will they grow into plants that bear fruit, or will they get eaten by gophers?
Yeah. Well, they in the article that I read, what was, I think, then the leader of the Palestinian Authority openly said, we reject Hamas and we'll kick them out and form our own government again. It sounds to me like it could be another trick.
You think?
Yeah. Tell them anything.
Yeah.
Just to get them off our backs.
And in the idea being that Hamas and the PLO are depicted to us as enemies of each other, but they both want to destroy the Jewish state and kill Jews. So what's the real difference? I mean, they want to do it in a different way, or they disagree about some policies. They're both basically cut from the same cloth.
Yeah. The other thing that struck me was when you had talked about the refugee camps.
Yes.
And how they were established in, 47, 48, 49 era.
Yeah.
And they're still there.
That's right.
And reading what I started reading about them on the internet, and you could pick through some of the junk that was in there, but they're describing how the conditions in many of them are horrible. They don't have adequate services. They don't have adequate water, sanitation, and many people are living just on the dirt floors. Some people have been able to build several stories up and get up out of the muck, but those are the wealthier refugees. But they're still, they're still there. And like you pointed out, you didn't think there was anyone alive of the original refugees anymore. But they're still there, and they're still called refugees.
Right.
Because
the original refugees. If you went into a refugee camp in 1948, I mean that was 3-4 years before I was born. I was born in 51, so that's 75 years ago. So if you went in as a babe in arms, you might still be alive, but you're going to be a pretty old cat. On the other hand, if you were an adult at that time, you've long since passed away. And who remains in these refugee camps? Your sons and daughters, their sons and daughters, etc. So these refugee camps have literally, you've had entire generations of people who have lived and died in refugee camps, which is, again, there are all kinds of things from this that are very difficult for civilized Westerners to wrap their minds around. And the idea,
yes, and it's not being taught, and that's why you have some of these groups in the various universities, are blaming Israel for being, an oppressor and what have you. But nobody's talking about the fact that all the money that has been given by other Arab nations to the Gaza, West Bank area has been used against Israel rather than for the betterment of their own people.
Either that or, if you'll recall, the former leader of the PLO was Yasser Arafat. When he died, he had numbered Swiss accounts that had billions of dollars in them. He estimated something like $4 or $5 billion. So Yasser Arafat was doing very well for himself with that aid money that came in. A lot of it went into his personal pocket.
And again, that's not being brought out either because it detracts from the narrative.
This is why when we had a caller a couple of days ago who said that he felt that most of what he was reading and seeing in the media was Israeli propaganda, and at the same time he's telling me that the Israelis are being depicted in this horrifying fashion, and I'm asking him, hey, think about that. If I'm Israel, am I going to present you with pictures of blown up hospitals and starving children and say the Israelis are responsible for this? It strikes me as inconsistent behavior.
I heard that broadcast.
Yeah, inconsistent behavior.
But I think it's this way. If you want to believe